I was thinking, because I got so many memories with the outlet company. I mean, so many memories.
I grew up at the outlet. I was very comfortable with the company. I loved the company. I loved the people that worked there.
You could come into the outlet and get anything you wanted for a fair price.
To a large extent, the outlet was the heartbeat of Providence from the viewpoint of business.
I got married to the outlet. It was so good to me.
You know, it hurts to see that building being torn down. That was once the outlet department store. And if you lived in Rhode Island in this 20th century, that place probably touched your life. I'm Walter Gravel. I once worked in the broadcast division of this venerable institution. For almost 100 years, the outlet was more than just a store, more than a place to find a bargain or to look for a job. We want to show you why. But to do that, we have to take you back in time. Back to the very beginning of the outlet department store.
The American department store. The term isn't recorded in the language till 1887. But by the turn of the century, when this comedy sketch called Bargain Day was filmed, the department store had become an integral part of the American landscape. New York City, April 1905, an unrehearsed mob scene at Rothschild's 5 and 10 on 14th Street. A crush of anxious shoppers surged into the narrow entrance. For the owners of stores like Rothschild's, it was the best of times. Early attempts at discount retailing, such as Rothschild's 5 and 10, were risky affairs. Some faded quickly, while others survived for decades. By the year 1980, the outlet company owned over 150 stores and employed thousands of workers. The firm was operating coast to coast and from Maine to Florida, generating millions of dollars in profits from both retailing and broadcasting. By any definition of the word, the company had become an enormous success. But every business venture requires capital investment and involves certain formal procedures. Records at City Hall in Providence document what may be the first outlet company transaction. September 20th, 1894, one Joseph Samuels has applied for a peddler's license. He will be allowed to sell wearing apparel, dry goods, tobacco, and hardware. The cost of the license is $5. His name will be added to the list of other noted retail merchants who began as peddlers: Adam Gimbel, Andrew Sachs, and Marcus Spiegel. Born in Washington, D.C., just after the Civil War, Joseph Samuels and his brother Leon arrived in Providence, Rhode Island sometime in the early 1890s. Here they rented a storefront on Weybosset Street and, much to the dismay of the established downtown merchants, began selling their wares at cut-rate prices. The Samuels brothers called their store the Manufacturer's Outlet, boasting that they bought directly from the manufacturer and thereby sold at great discount. Under pressure from local merchants, newspapers, including the Providence Journal, refused to accept advertisements from the outlet. In 1898, the Samuels responded by publishing their own weekly paper, the Outlet Bulletin. It was an audacious move, but certainly in tune with the times. By the turn of the century, the mood of the country was one of bluster and confidence. That splendid little war with Spain had resulted in the acquisition of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, and the annexation of Hawaii. In Newport, young Navy cadets performed calisthenics on the gentle slopes of Costa's Harbor Island. In mock battles at the shoreline, the War College was defended against would-be invaders. Offshore, the military tested its top-secret Whitehead torpedo in the waters of Narragansett Bay. But for the Samuels brothers, a battle of a different sort was brewing. They were about to confront powerful enemies, well-established and well-financed. The dispute wasn't about territory or politics. The argument was over the cost of trolley transfers. And in the fall of 1901, the outlet declared war.
Well, it became a big deal mainly because free transfers was a way to express dissatisfaction with the monopoly control and the wealth of the transit interests here in Providence. The Union Street Railway Company had enormous gross revenues. A fare was only a nickel. So people today would say, so what, what's the big flap over a nickel? But people only made 10 to 12 cents an hour. So it was a big thing back in 1901 when the cry was raised and the Samuel brothers joined with the popular outcry to demand free transfers. Of course, there was a little bit of demagoguery in this campaign. The Samuels brothers seized upon a popular issue. They would trumpet that issue in the pages of their newspaper. Their newspaper was published not only to achieve reform and to promote justice and to serve other functions that a newspaper still serves, but it was also founded naturally to advertise their merchandise because they couldn't get advertising in the Providence Journal or in the Evening Telegram. So there were altruistic reasons for their campaign. There were also mercenary reasons.
The year is 1903, and this is not Buckingham Palace. It's Exchange Place in Providence, what we now call Kennedy Plaza. The occasion is a rare visit by the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of London, part of their tour of the United States. A short melodramatic film, made in the same year, warned the public of the evils of shoplifting. In Providence, the city's finest are perfecting their marching skills. And in nearby Pawtucket, the fire department is testing the very latest in firefighting equipment. But for the average citizen, the big news is the grand opening of the expanded outlet department store. On September 30th, 1903, 35 new departments drew a multitude of bargain hunters, attracted by the promise of quality goods at fabulous prices. Labor Day in Rhode Island, 1915. A study of the wages paid to department store workers in New York at about the same time revealed that most received less than $9 per week. And yet it wasn't until the 1940s that labor unions had any great impact on American department stores. It may be that employees in retail stores at this time were either happy just to have a job or at least willing to suffer silently. It took a chap with unusual talent and bile to tweak the outlet's nose. That man was none other than the renowned satirist S.J. Perlman, Old Vinegar Puss to his friends. As a stock boy back around 1916, Perlman received $1 for a 10-hour workday. Writing in the 60s, he looked back at his less than pleasant memories of the outlet, or rather, the beehive, as he dubbed it.
Anyone who has ever worked in a department store surely must have quailed under the hauteur of petty satraps like buyers and section managers, their medieval harassment of employees, the constant espionage, and the penalties exacted for any infraction of the rules reflected in the lick-spittle servility of underlings are enough to sicken a goat. I speak from intimate knowledge. At a formative period of my life, and for nearly 6 months, I was a teenage vassal, the lowliest, in a department store. Initially a stockroom boy in the men's footwear section, I submitted to the usual pranks visited upon a novice. The shoe salesmen were a dismal lot of human beings. It convulsed them to send me on errands like fetching a pail of steam or a left-handed monkey wrench. And their guffaws at my naivete reduced me to jelly. One day, in an apocalyptic revelation, it dawned on me that I had been exploited. $1 for 10 hours' work was less than I had earned as a freelance. That night, I tore my pay envelope to shreds, chalked a gargoyle likeness of the section manager on the trap door, and walked out of the beehive.
The years 1917 to 1919 were the most prosperous in Rhode Island's history, and for good reason. The world was at war, and this time, at least, the adage, "war is good business," seems to have been appropriate. Providence firms received orders for millions of dollars of munitions and other war supplies from England and France. This meant high wages and full employment. Rhode Islanders had money to spend, and the outlet prospered. In 1917, Rhode Island Governor R. Livingston Beekman added honor to income by making Joseph Samuels a lieutenant colonel on his military staff. It was strictly an honorary appointment, but the colonel, as he was known thereafter, seemed quite comfortable with his new title. In 1919, the outlet celebrated its 25th year. A pamphlet published by the store lauds its triumphant first quarter century. Against all odds, the Samuels brothers had not only survived, but prospered. For them and for the outlet, the future held new opportunities and new challenges. By now, Joseph Samuels, the acknowledged leader of the store, was a wealthy and powerful man. He could easily have chosen a life of leisure. But for the colonel, the outlet and its employees remained all important.
He came in the store mornings, 8:15, store open at 9:30. And he'd walk through and look at all the merchandise, go around feeling, and he'd look at everything around there, you know, and feel, and if the merchandise wasn't what he knew it to be, he was a merchandise man. He wasn't a joker.
And he got after me once for not using the elevator. I was halfway up the second floor back stairs on Garnett Street. And he pulled me by the arm and he said, "Do you work here?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "I don't want you walking these stairs." He says, "We have elevators for even our employees." So I used the elevator after that.
Yeah. In those days, the boss was the boss. And he'd be a very important figure in the company. So he didn't fool around when he was there. We were highly respected, but a little aloof.
I knew he tested me because later on in life I said, that guy tested me before he took a liking to me. Because of the money I had in my pocket sometimes that he had, he'd say, "Hold on to this." Oh, this was Babe's watch. "Hold on to Babe's watch." He says, "That's all solid gold."
I talked with one girl, and they used to have, one of the organizations, they used to have a dance in the ballroom here, and he danced with all the girls. You know, a good dancer, she said.
Yet all was not perfect. Colonel Samuels and his wife Alice Murr Samuels had only one child, his daughter Bertha Babe Sinclair. The time had not yet arrived when a wealthy merchant would turn over his business to his daughter. On June 14, 1922, Babe Sinclair gave birth to a son, Joseph Samuel Sinclair, soon nicknamed Dodie. At last, the colonel had an heir for the outlet estate.
I always thought, there's a guy that is a great father to someone. And he was a great father, because I remember when, later on, when I think it was 2 or 3 years after Dodie was born, how happy he was to have a grandson. And that's all he could talk about was my grandson. See, that's something he didn't have because he had a daughter. And he really was ape over him.
Perhaps fortune was smiling on the outlet. In the same year that Dodie Sinclair was born, so was the store's radio station, WJAR. Radio was in its infancy. Many amateurs were building their own receivers, and in some cases, their own transmitters. Leon Samuels had been tinkering with a ham radio set in his Narragansett home since 1920. Early on, he recognized the value a radio station would have for the outlet, both as public relations ploy and a means of increasing sales at the store. He convinced his brother of radio's potential, and on September 6th, 1922, WJAR went on the air. It wasn't the first time that Leon's public relations hunches had proven correct. He was a savvy judge of the buying public and knew that a salesman's first duty was to capture his customers' attention. The outlet was famous for doing just that. In 1906, Harry Houdini struggled to escape, bound and tied, from an outlet company crate. In 1907, an obliging couple entered the bounds of matrimony while perched atop an arch erected by the store to celebrate Old Home Week. In January of 1927, the first transatlantic phone call to London from Rhode Island was made by Colonel Samuels from his office. 4 months later, a shy young male pilot from Minnesota would captivate the world with a daring solo flight across the Atlantic. Charles A. Lindbergh's success made him a hero. And when he arrived in Rhode Island as part of a national tour, the outlet was bound to get into the act. The parade route would take the renowned aviator right down Woonsocket Street. Leon Samuels devised a plan to salute the Lone Eagle and perhaps draw a bit of attention to the store. Leon had a tugboat whistle attached to the exterior of the building, and as the car carrying Lindbergh approached, 3 loud blasts were heard above the pandemonium. The next day, the Providence Journal reported that when his limo swept down Woonsocket Street, Lucky Lindy had flashed a smile at all 1,200 employees of the outlet. In 1929, Leon Samuels died after a long illness. But he had lived long enough to see his sales gimmick, radio, become an important part of the American scene and the outlet department store. 1932, the Colonel and his wife Alice depart for a winter cruise to the West Indies. The country is in the grip of the Great Depression. Over 20 million people are out of work. The man who once hawked his wares from a pushcart on Woonsocket Street will spend his vacation in the tropics. But he has not forgotten the sting of poverty and the plight of those less fortunate.
If you had a rag around your throat, you'd say, Ed, as I was growing older, find out about that kid. See where he lives. Find out if you can find anything about the family, how destitute the family might be. Well, that kid, if there was something wrong with that kid, he'd have him sent to the doctor. He'd take care of it.
Similar anonymous acts of charity are recounted by many who knew the Colonel, and those gifts and donations made publicly are a matter of record. Beginning in 1899, tons of coal were distributed to poor families during harsh New England winters. In summer months, the store provided holiday trips for orphans. A 1904 ad in the outlet bulletin offers free eye examinations and glasses for those who cannot afford them. But best known of Joseph Samuel's many displays of generosity was his gift of $300,000 to Rhode Island Hospital for the construction and endowment of a children's dental clinic. It was a princely sum at the time, moving then-Governor Norman S. Case to describe Colonel Samuels as this man who finds his greatest pleasure in giving and sharing with others the successful results of his labors. Philanthropy was a virtue much admired in the days when no federal, state, or local agencies existed to help the poor. The Colonel practiced it both publicly and privately, with vigor and with pride. In 1936, Rhode Island celebrated the 300th anniversary of its founding as an English colony. The outlet joined the festivities by reconstructing its arch over Woonsocket Street. It was an important date in the state's history, but one that would soon be overshadowed. Ask Rhode Islanders old enough to remember the 1930s, and you are less likely to hear about the state's tercentenary than tales of a great hurricane of '38.
And my husband, he was my boyfriend then, he turned in he worked in the men's clothing, we turned in his cash, and we got out. We got over to Richmond Street, and we had a little car, and by the time we got up the hill, it was all flooded, and the whole basement was flooded completely, because it came in like 5:15 was like the 0 hour, and filled the basement and the top of the counter on the first floor.
The outlet, like the rest of downtown Providence, was hard hit by the storm. The day after the catastrophe was a time of sober reflection for the employees of the store and its owners.
After the flood, well, I call it the flood, the hurricane, because the buyers were screaming and hollering, oh, what do we do? And he said, well, maybe we can salvage it. No, he says, we got off the push wagon years ago and we're not going back on it. So that's what he said, you know.
There was, in fact, little fear that the colonel would be forced back to the push cart. The bustling department store that he had built over the past 40 years was sturdy enough to withstand the fury of the storm, and many more to come. Born amidst the cutthroat retail competition that followed the financial panic of 1893, and bullied by those who envied its success, the outlet was in many ways the stubborn child of its creator.
I have to guess. I think he loved the competition and the promotion and of beating the Westminster merchants at their own game and taking on the Providence Journal. I think he liked that type of thing. I think he reveled in it.
He was genuinely concerned with the plight of the poor, yet fond of gambling and fast, expensive cars. Kind-hearted, caring, but capable of using a gold watch to test the loyalty of a young boy, Joseph Samuels was no two-dimensional character. He was loved by many, despised by a few, and respected by virtually anyone who dealt with him. A year and a half after this film was taken, he would die at the age of 74. His death sent shockwaves through the store that he had built from the ground up.
When he died, all the girls, sales girls and everybody, damn near died with him. They missed him something terrible. He was a great, I can't just elaborate on how great a guy he was.
February 13th, 1939, Hitler leaves Berlin for Hamburg, where he will inspect a new battleship and lay a wreath on Bismarck's tomb. In the Atlantic Ocean, U.S. naval forces practice defense maneuvers to protect the Panama Canal in the event of war. At 4:15 p.m., Colonel Joseph Samuels dies at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston. The future of both the institution he built and the people who had come to rely on it was now clouded. For the outlet and for the nation, dramatic transformations were about to take place. It was the end of an era and the beginning of new and uncertain times.
I ask the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed.
That was on a Sunday, and on Monday morning we all went up to the 4th floor in the radio department, and we listened to the declaration of war. And of course I was 18 years old, so I was ready to, I knew I was going into it.
With the United States suddenly at war, everyone seemed eager to pitch in and help their country. Patriotic department store workers had to ask themselves,
now just what is our work in this war? You and I are retail salespeople. There are 5 million of us in the United States. That is an army if we pull together. A mob that deserves no victory if we don't. 5 million retail salespeople. The most powerful, the highest trained selling group the world has ever known. Every time America puts its hand in its pants pocket or goes on a treasure hunt in a woman's purse, it's because you and I have sold them something. Merchandise, or service. And now Uncle Sam needs our training. He's handed us the biggest selling job in history. Now is our chance to prove that we really are salesmen, not human vending machines. Now is our chance to show every dictator that selling is a greater force than the whip of oppression. War bonds and stamps.
Naturally, the outlet joined the cause. The store participated in the sale of war bonds, setting up special booths where people could purchase them. Newsreels brought scenes from the front to local theaters. But most Americans depended on their radios for information, entertainment, and President Roosevelt's famous fireside chats. Everything from the most inexpensive set to the latest in quality receivers could be purchased at the outlet.
Consoles were just coming in at that time, the big floor models. And then they had a loudspeaker out on the Main Street, way Boston Street, and people would gather and watch me while I changed the different stations. Sometimes I'd get up and walk around and point to the radios.
Once the proud owner got his radio into his living room, he could tune to WJAR, which provided both national broadcasts and locally produced programs.
Bridges of Destiny. The Bridge Tire Company of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, distributor of Gillette tires of Bear for Wear, presents transcribed Bridges of Destiny.
You will travel a long way in this world before you find a bridge more beautiful than the Mount Hope Bridge in Rhode Island. It traces a slender design across the deep water where Narragansett Bay meets Mount Hope Bay. It is the immediate connection between Old Bristol, from which licensed pirates sailed to raid the commerce of Great Britain's enemies in colonial wars, and older Portsmouth, where settled the few Englishmen who bought the island of Rhode Island from the Indians for 40 fathoms of white beads. Those passing over feel a lift of the spirit which they do not quite understand, and those passing under in boats instinctively look up as they approach the significant tracery of steel.
Bridges of Destiny is presented each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning at this time by the Bridge Tire Company, distributor of the famous Gillette tire.
Not every local offering struck such a somber chord. The Kiddie Review Show, a popular program which began in 1931, featured the talents of children from throughout the state.
Well, I think it got on the air back when most of the talent hereabouts was amateur talent anyway. And everyone listened. They were abandoning the wind-up phonograph and listening to the radio loudspeaker instead. And hey, you could get your kid on that program by, merely applying to Celia Moreau, and if she found that your child had talent, she'd put him on. And it became a very popular thing. It became, I guess, a fad thing that if you had been on Celia's program, you were looked upon by all your friends as being a little bit better than the ordinary kid on the block. And it was a very popular radio program. And she did have some very talented children.
A little girl here, 7 years of age, is Madeline McGean. She's very anxiously waiting to take her turn at the microphone, so we won't delay now and listen to her now as she sings.
Gonna take a sentimental journey. Gonna get my heart at ease. Gonna make a sentimental journey to the new old memory.
Got my bag, I got my reservation. Time I could afford. Oh God, does that bring back a lot of memories. We would be practicing off to the side somewhere, and they would call us out individually, and I would sing, and there were others that were tap dancing, so that was going over on the radio too.
WJAR Radio was an enormous financial success. Yet the bank trustees who controlled the store were cautious men when it came to newfangled ideas. As early as 1944, representatives from NBC approached them with suggestions that the outlet explore a new type of broadcasting called television.
Television, the baby of the radio family, is creating openings for experienced engineers, most of whom are graduating from radio work.
From the scene of action, cameramen televise events which you may see in your own home, if, of course, you have a television receiver. But men with radio experience, especially those who have prepared themselves through study and application, are given preference.
Well, that far back, television was something that was in the back chapters of the book, but overall, by the time you finished, you had a pretty good grasp of the electronics world as it existed then. I'm talking pre-World War II. Of course, during World War II, everything accelerated so that at the end of World War II, you had 100 times more in the electronics field than you had when the war began.
The FCC granted the outlet company a construction permit for a TV station in 1946. But it would take 3 years of procrastination and delay before the trustees would gamble the millions of investment dollars needed to become Rhode Island's first television station. On Sunday, July 10th, 1949, WJAR TV finally went on the air.
We were just beginning to understand what television was all about. We were a little bit familiar with it. We watched Channel 4, and I'd been up to Channel 4. And it was a decision for my wife and I to make. Was this thing going to last, or was it going to be a fad, or what? And we decided, hey, we're young, let's take the gamble and see where it goes. And I think all the other fellows felt the same way about it.
The hesitant manner in which the outlet approached the new medium of television was for some an indication of the conservative style by which the bank trustees were running the store.
The company changed through the years. Originally, it was the colonel ran the company and he made the decisions. When he decided he wanted to go into radio, he said, let's go into radio. We'll get what we need, the people, the equipment, and so forth, because we want to sell radio sets. By the time they were getting into television, it was in trust, and the banks and a large board of directors was running the company. And they were very reluctant. And all over the country, people were very reluctant because television, nobody could figure how you could afford to buy programming, put it on, and pay for it.
Colonel Samuel's will had stipulated that his grandson, Dodie Sinclair, would share equally with his mother control of all his stock when he reached the age of 40. But unknown to Dodie, a plan was afoot to prevent this from ever happening. In December of 1958, the bank trustees dropped a bombshell. They would sell the outlet company to William Zeckendorf, a New York real estate speculator. Dodie Sinclair, just 3 years short of inheriting his shares in the outlet company, vehemently opposed the sale, yet the trustees chose to ignore him. Was it their perception that the heir to the outlet legacy was born into privilege and comfort, and therefore ill-suited for the demands of running a major retail concern? Perhaps the bank trustees assumed he would relinquish his dream of taking control of the company and accept the wisdom of their judgment. If this was their thinking, they were sadly mistaken. Joseph Samuel Sinclair, grandson of the colonel, refused to go along quietly. Instead, Dodie chose to fight.
I had a tip-off from New York, from a friend of mine in the publishing business, that a contract had been signed. And I got on the phone immediately and met Bruce Sunland in New York, and we sent a telegram asking him to hold up until this could be brought to court.
I grew up in Providence with Dodie Sinclair. His parents and my parents were friends. I knew his grandfather, Colonel Samuels, and I was familiar with the family and the company from the time I was a small child. And the lawyers in Rhode Island thought I was what they call a strike lawyer, just a glory hound, out to try and hold up the deal and carve myself out a fee.
The legal battle for control of the outlet began on January 20th, 1959. Zeckendorf was offering $120 per share, but Bruce Sunland had devised a bit of courtroom drama to emphasize his client's ability to beat that offer.
And Bruce Sunland conceived the idea that in court, we'd pull out $1 million check as a down payment. And we sort of rehearsed how this was to be done when it got to a key question. I was to reach in my pocket, pull out, and say, here, I have $1 million check as a down payment. So as he's getting near the question, I can feel the perspiration suddenly start to pour out because I know it's coming up. He gets to the question, my hand's shaking, I reach in the pocket, pull out, go into my spiel, and immediately
The judge, who'd been sitting back looking at the ceiling, came forward and said, "What did you say? And may I see that check?"
In March of 1959, the court ruled in favor of Dodie Sinclair. And in July of the same year, the Rhode Island Supreme Court upheld their decision. 3 years later, in June of 1962, Dodie Sinclair celebrated his 40th birthday and the long-awaited inheritance of his stock.
It happened that we used to have outlet outings each year at Crescent Park or Rocky Point, and this one happened to be at Crescent Park. And they presented me with a tremendous birthday cake. How did I feel? I probably was the only person in the United States that couldn't wait to be 40. Most people dreaded. I was looking forward to it.
The fight for control of the outlet was over, and everyone seemed pleased that this Rhode Island institution would remain a family-run operation. The future of the company seemed secure, but in fact, the greatest changes in the history of the store were just around the corner. It's a lovely fall day at Roger Williams Park, and excited school children have just arrived to see the animals. A sight to cheer the heart and bring back memories of our own childhood. Let's journey back in time, almost 100 years, to the very turn of the century. The date is October 20th, 1900, and school children have just arrived to meet Baby Roger, the zoo's first elephant. Baby Roger will amuse and amaze youngsters for 22 years. But in 1915, he becomes difficult to handle and must be sold to a circus. For the next 14 years, the park is without a pachyderm, an intolerable situation.
The story is, I don't know if it's true or not, the story is that one time my grandfather came in there, a couple of drinks under his belt, and fell in love with the elephant and bought the elephant for Roger Williams and named it after his wife. And that's where Alice the elephant came from.
Alice the First was followed by Alice the Second, also donated by the Colonel. Beloved by generations of Rhode Islanders, she lived for over 30 years. The outlet's goodwill toward its employees spans the history of the store. Annual outings for workers go back as far as 1896 and continued for decades.
When you're smiling.
Today, the idea of a yearly caravan to Rocky Point for a shore dinner may seem a bit hokey, but the enjoyment and sense of camaraderie felt by those who attended these events cannot be denied.
The sun comes shining through.
The tradition of concern for the health and well-being of the community was carried on by the outlet in a number of ways. The most notable being the polio clinic, organized by Dodie Sinclair in July of 1960. It was the height of the dreaded polio epidemic, and over 11,000 people passed through the store in one day, the largest mass inoculation at that time. 40 years after the hurricane of '38, the state was again the object of nature's fury. This time, it took the form of a powerful blizzard that buried roads and highways, immobilizing traffic and trapping many people in downtown Providence. Under orders from Bruce Sunderland, president of the outlet at the time, the store was open for those who could not make their way home. Food, warmth, and shelter were provided for over 500 people during their 4-day visit to the outlet. Of course, winter in Rhode Island wasn't all bad. After all, winter meant the coming of Christmas. And Christmas, well...
Christmas meant outlet company. There was Santa Claus and the talking Christmas tree.
The third floor, we had the fabulous Toyland. We had real trains where people could ride them.
And I remember as a youngster coming downtown, they had the fifth floor, they had the animals around Christmas time. It was very, very nice. Some good memories, pleasant memories.
I hope you have a nice big fireplace for me.
Well, we don't have a fireplace in our house.
You don't have a fireplace in your house.
We're hang the stockings in the garage of our house.
And you want me to come in the garage?
Yeah. The garage will be right in, it will be, you know where
the front door.
Then in the stairway on the side of the garage.
And for those who worked at the store during the holidays, the shared celebration was a very special event indeed. In the history of the American department store, the rules and regulations that govern the behavior of employees have often been a reflection of the manners and values held by the country itself. If you want to understand a nation's culture, look no further than the relation between buyer and seller.
Our store is judged not only by the appearance of our employees, but by their attitudes and manners as well. In all your contacts with customers or fellow worker customers, show an interest in their needs with politeness, helpfulness, and consideration. It will be appreciated and make your own working day more pleasant.
The employees were like a family. Not like today where you pick out your own merchandise and you take care of yourself. We were trained and we gave individual service. It was personalized service.
Employees who come in contact with customers are expected to maintain a neat, business-like appearance and conform to required dress regulations. These regulations are described completely in the Outlet Company's store manual and will be discussed further with you in training class.
The paternal tone of the store's training film seems quaint to us today and essentially harmless. But in the early days of retailing, at the outlet and elsewhere, there were unwritten rules that were not so charming. In 1940, there were over 100,000 female sales workers employed by department stores throughout the United States. Yet less than 500 were black. The National Urban League began a campaign to get jobs for African Americans in department stores. Not in the menial tasks that they had been traditionally assigned to, but as salespeople. In Rhode Island, the gauntlet was cast down by a small newspaper published by the black community. At first, no local department store would accept the challenge. The breakthrough occurred in December of 1947.
I had gone to every department store downtown to apply for a job as a sales clerk, and everyone gave me the brush, as usual. And Mrs. Wiley came by. She said, "Louise, we've been trying to call you all morning. Shirley wants you to go over to the outlet. They're hiring colored sales girls." So she said, "Would you like to work?" I said, "Sure."
Like other pioneers in the quest for equality, Louise Robinson had to confront not only blatant prejudice, but the silent forms of scorn that often precede true acceptance.
No one ever said anything to me, but they ignored me. At that time, there used to be over 800 people in the store at Christmas time. And when you went to the lunchroom, getting a seat was like getting a seat on a subway in New York. I had a table to myself for quite a little while before they would come and eat with me. But eventually, I could never sit alone. I had plenty of company. Yeah, that's the way it worked.
The Chronicle praised the outlet for its decision to hire Providence's first black saleswoman, and soon other downtown department stores followed suit.
Outlet broke the ice. They broke the color line with black salespeople, yes.
In many ways, the history of the store and the way it touched people's lives is best told by those who worked or shopped there. These recollections paint a vivid portrait of an American department store.
It was like we were like one big family. You didn't mind going to work. I enjoyed going to work. I looked forward. I went inside half an hour before I had to start. I enjoyed it.
And the important thing about the outlet, if you showed any ambition, and if you were aggressive, you were moved along. So there was some competition there. They knew they would be promoted.
We had families coming. Everybody got their first communion suit and confirmation suit here. We had a policy, for example, if unfortunately someone had a death in the family, we would bring in a tailor, and they could come in at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'd outfit the whole family.
you know, in black at the time. We do things like this without any question.
Men's pants. I specialize in men's pants. And when the salesman sold a suit and it was too tight, one of the salesmen would come upstairs and say, let it out. So right away, Mr. Gatsby would give me the pants, and I'll let out the pants, and the salesman would come, try it on the customer, and it would fit. That's how he made a sale.
Yeah, I did a little bit of store security. They had me at Christmas time keep my school clothes on when I came in, my coat, and walk around and look for shoplifters. I probably learned a little bit of my cynicism over the years from that.
We did a lot of other things. We were thinking of changing the name. They came up with a name, which, as I recall, was the Outlook. And the fee for that company was huge. It was in, I don't know, $15,000 or $20,000. We had had a contest in the company maybe about a year earlier than that to come up with a name of our publication, our house organ, and my secretary had wanted the name that she had come up with was Outlook, and she got $2 for that. So she said, you owe me $14,998.
I think the outlet was lucky to have a medical person, not because it was me, but to get the attention and get to the hospital or doctor or anything, you know. I think that was very important, and I think it was good for the business also that this person is taken care of. I mean, we had a couple suicides in the outlet. We had a couple amputations, and, you know, you'd never think that these things happen in a place of industry, but it does.
I remember when I met one of the older gentlemen in the store, and he wanted to know what I did and so forth, and I said I was in the broadcast division. And, oh, he said, you're on the 4th floor. I said, no, 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 I'm the television station on the 5th floor. Oh, he said, you're the wireless people. So there was still that impression that we were the wireless people.
Talk to any longtime employee about the outlet, and the word family is sure to be spoken. But no family is ever entirely free from domestic disputes. And in 1969, as contract negotiations between store management and representatives of the Retail Workers Union faltered, it looked as if the outlet family was headed for a divorce.
Rumor around the store at that time was it was the year for the strike. I don't know, I know the issue was wages, but I also think maybe the union was testing its strength a little bit.
The strike ended after only a month, but it marked a watershed in employee management relations.
Management was altogether different. It was not the outlet company prior to the strike.
In 1976, Bruce Sunderland became president and chief executive officer of the outlet company. He immediately began a program of expansion for both the retail and broadcasting divisions. Sunderland had been responsible for company acquisitions since he was elected to the board of directors in 1960. For 13 years, he had greatly improved profits for the company. But in 1979, his long-range plan for reaching $500 million in gross sales ran into trouble.
The retailing end of it ran into difficulties not as a result of the retail so much as a result of the debt that we incurred to buy the Sacramento television station. Shortly thereafter, interest rates went to 21%, and we had the 1980 and 81 recession, which was a sharp recession, started by gas lines in California. People stopped driving their cars to shopping malls to go to stores, and the retail business went in the tank.
In the fall of 1979, the decision was reached by the board of directors to sell all retail ventures, including the downtown department store, and concentrate on broadcasting. In September of 1980, the outlet was sold to a group calling itself United Department Stores. Within 2 years, they declared bankruptcy and closed the downtown store.
The people there were really very uncontrollable, crying, why is this happening? We can't believe it. And I think there was anger, but there was also a sadness. And I think it's the sadness that was the greatest part, because We were such a family there.
It was a bitter blow to those who had spent their lives working at the outlet, and for the city of Providence. As with any tragedy, the question must be asked, could it have been avoided?
In today's kind of lifestyle, with the automobile and fast roads, it's so much more convenient to go to other places. So that this movement out took place all over the country. And Providence is no different. And as I talk to some people locally that speak about the demise, for instance, of the outlet company, with a good deal of sadness, a good deal of nostalgia about the good old days, they make it sound as though that somehow or other this area is unique. But we're really no different from what's taken place all over the nation. It's a national pattern.
The department store was gone forever. What remained was a magnificent structure that now occupied an entire city block.
Well, I think the Hodges building itself looks to the Chicago School of Commercial Architecture, which came to be fairly influential in American architecture in the 1880s and 1890s. What we see in the Hodges building, as well as in the rest of the whole outlet building, is that Chicago School of Architecture sort of filtered back east and classicized for Eastern consumption. This is very good late 19th, early 20th century commercial architecture. Undoubtedly the best of from an architectural point of view, the best of the department stores built in Providence in the early 20th century.
Like bids at an auction, there came a steady stream of proposals, promises, and plans for the transformation of the outlet building into something befitting this Providence landmark. Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these: it might have been.
All companies responding on box 1415. We have a report of a possible fire on the top of the outlet building, the old outlet building.
The store was gone, the building destroyed, leaving us to wonder, what remains of the outlet?
In the year 1919, the Samuels brothers illustrated their grand venture using verse by the poet Rudyard Kipling. In looking back over the 90-year history of their store, it seems fitting to carry on that tradition. Cities and thrones and powers stand in time's eye almost as long as flowers, which daily die. But as new buds put forth to glad new men, out of the spent, unconsidered earth, the cities rise again. So time, that is overkind to all that be, ordains us even as blind, as bold as she, that in our very death and burial sure, shadow to shadow, well persuaded, saith, see how our works endure.
We had the buses that would stop in front of the store. People coming in, wherever they were, the buses always stopped in front of the outlet. Now, you know, 9 out of 10 walked right in the outlet.
I felt so bad when they were going to close the outlet. It was just like, you know, you're losing your home. There was traffic jams and getting to the outlet company for the sales. And it was very good sales, tremendous sales.
Outlet had everything. Under one roof, you might say, and a great variety of things. My golly, if anything you needed, you could get at the outlet.
Half of my life was spent in the outlet. They're tearing the building down now, and it seems like half of me is going away.
It was a beautiful building at the time, and it's just too bad that it had to go down.
So what have we got left?
Memories, good ones.